It's fair to say Tom Menino had no special love for the press. He could be ornery, defensive, and impatient, but he also knew how to seduce reporters he liked. And in the end, it was the media that helped cement his legacy. Mayor Tom Menino had the classic love-hate relationship with the press. He loved the attention, he hated the criticism, and often took issue with the Boston Herald. After all, it was Herald columnist Howie Carr who dubbed him Mumbles Menino.
We have an amazing set of remarkable athletes whose action in the moment have become ionic.
Of course, he had his favorites. My deceased husband, Kirby Perkins, was one, a favorite from way back, as was one-time Boston Herald reporter Dave Wedge. Here's the mayor giving WGBH's Adam Riley the brush-off in favor of Wedge.
Mayor, one more question about John.
Quiet down over there.
Oh, sure. I'll wait.
Wait for David, he's my pal.
He also knew everyone's name, at least the old-timers.
Are you announcing your candidacy now?
Shields, go back to the Cape.
But today is a day for reporters to remember. All over Facebook and social media are photos and comments from the city's press corps. WBZ's Carl Stevens even wrote one of his signature poems.
This city, this Boston, was tended with care by a gardener who worked far more than his share.
The Boston Globe's Brian McGrory remembers being there for Menino's first ride in his private elevator to the 5th floor of City Hall.
He was a very regular guy who was kind of stunned by what he was suddenly given by becoming acting mayor.
But McGrory knew another side of Menino.
Look, Tom Menino had a thin skin. There's no question about it. I mean, there were moments when I thought it might be translucent. It was so thin.
And McGrory and the mayor were close. But no reporter had a more special relationship with him than Channel 5's Susan Warnick. Here's the mayor calling her last December 31st on her birthday.
Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to the oldest person on TV. Happy birthday to you.
Like the rest of Boston, the media is going to miss him. So did Menino get the better of the reporters that covered him? Here to hash it out is Adam Riley of WGBH News, Marjorie Egan of Crux and WGBH News, Callie Crossley, also of WGBH News, and Dan Kennedy of Northeastern University. It was impossible not to like him. That was one of the problems. So even if you had a difference of opinion, you thought he was wrong with something, he could be dismissive, if he said ornery. It was impossible. Brian McGrory said there were times when he was a columnist and he wrote things that the mayor would go weeks without taking his phone calls or speaking to him in any fashion at all, just because he was so annoyed with him. But eventually they'd mend those things over. But he did have a special relationship with probably 10 or 12 reporters in the city that really transcended really a reportorial relationship and more into a friendship.
He also, despite the fact that he might freeze a reporter out for a while if he got angry, he was very accessible. I've never heard of him freezing out anybody permanently. I'm not someone who talked with him a lot, but I remember having a long sit down with him in the late 90s. I've told this story before, but in person, he seemed incredibly articulate, and it's because you were getting the full Menino, the facial gestures, the hand gestures, the body language. You divorce his voice from the whole person, and that's where he kind of got the reputation of not being a good communicator. He's actually a very good communicator. Nobody ever had any problem understanding what he meant.
And just to follow up on Dan's point, I remember, I think we were both there at this time being at the Boston Phoenix when Menino came in for an editorial board meeting one Saturday, and he brought some donuts or some pastries, and then he sat with us for about 2 hours and took critical questions from 8 or 10 people. And I had seen people in settings like that, who I won't mention, prominent politicians, get a little agitated. It got kind of tense. And Menino, it was like watching a master at work. He took everything we threw at him. He always had a reply or sort of a deft parry. And he seemed like he was genuinely enjoying himself. I remember walking out of there, it was like noon on a Saturday, feeling exhilarated by what I had just witnessed. So, Yeah, we'd say he was thin-skinned, but I think he also enjoyed that back and forth and thrived on it, really.
But see, that's the point that you said, it's developed into a friendship. It's okay if everybody knows his or her role. You can be friends with somebody, but understand when you have to ask the tough question, you will. And that he understands that he can get mad about it, but he's still going to engage because that's part of the job of being a public figure. And that's what we see and talk about on this panel. How many times have we talked about people who just won't talk to anybody, shut themselves off, or say nasty things about the reporter because they ask the tough questions? I hope that's not a bygone era. I hope it's not. But that's the thing that he exemplified.
Well, one of the best stories I heard this week was from your old boss at the Boston Phoenix, now our colleague here at WGBH, Peter Kazis, who talked about how he wrote something in the Phoenix that the mayor didn't like, and he's walking down the street one day and he sees this big black SUV come up behind, and the window comes down, and Menino throws a donut out the window and hits him in the head. So that was, I guess he was a little ticked off at Peter. That's number one. Number two, you talked about misunderstanding him. I remember interviewing him once years ago, and I couldn't understand him, and I would say, excuse me, pardon me, and after the third time, and you still can't understand him. So I remember going back to the Herald, and I really couldn't write the story because I wasn't sure what he had said on many of those occasions, because he was kind of hard to understand. And the last thing is, I just wanted to say, Dot Joyce, who was his last press secretary, we did, when I was at the Herald, I'm no longer there, I shouldn't say we, when I was at the Herald, we did give him a hard time, and Howie Cart gave him a hard time, and I was part of the Herald, obviously, at the time. But Dot Joyce was terrific to me, and legitimate stories, and she was great. His previous secretaries were great, press secretaries were great too, but he did not take that out on me if I needed to get in touch with him about something. So he was differentiating among
it's interesting.
reporters.
You mentioned most of his press secretaries did come out of the media.
Yeah, Seth Cattell.
My goodness, I mean, he worked them to the bone. I mean, Dot Joyce is still doing it. She's going to be preparing the funeral too. It's like Seth Cattell, I mean, he worked like a dog.
Yeah, exhausted.
Yes, he did.
I mean, he had a great little anecdote in the paper today. I don't know if you saw it. It was in the Globe when he talked about how Tom Menino in a previous cancer surgery was out there anyway, not this last one, was out there anyway, going around to a bakery in West Roxbury. And Seth noticed that when you get out of the car, that the blood from the wound, which is still open, had come through his shirt. And nonetheless, he's going about his business.
So here's
Adam and I worked with Seth at the Phoenix, and that was a terrific piece.
Do you think that there are questions that should have been asked by the media that went unasked because so many of us were kind of smart with him?
No,
I don't think so.
I actually don't think so.
Really?
And
I don't think anybody. I think everybody went for him.
Yeah.
And he was disarming.
Much,
much the way Governor Deval Patrick is.
I think people looked plenty.
Yeah.
I mean, I think people looked for stories over the years, but this isn't a press thing, but there was a remarkable lack of corruption. 20 years. I mean, think of any other big city mayor that's gone 20 years without having somebody from the DPW put a driveway in.
The great email scandal of maybe 5 years ago when Mike Knievy erased the emails. That's the biggest scandal.
That was
That's
it.
pretty lame as far as scandals go.